That didn't work. This hearing will now come to order. Good afternoon and welcome to today's Research and Science Education Subcommittee hearing on the Science of Science and Innovation Policy, also known as SciSIP. For those of you who may not be familiar with the phrase, the science of science policy is a field of interdisciplinary research that focuses on understanding how our policy decisions impact innovation in science and engineering research. Given the magnitude of the federal investment in science and technology, there is a need for objective analysis and evaluation of federally funded R&D programs. And given the size of the budget deficit, congressional decision makers need the best information possible to make sure we are spending taxpayer dollars optimally. Today, we'll be hearing from a diverse panel of witnesses about the current state of research and education in this emerging field. This topic is of particular interest to me since it goes to the core of why I joined the Science and Technology Committee when I first came to Congress. Like most members of this committee, I believe that science and engineering research and education have driven long-term economic growth and improved the quality of life for all Americans. I view science and innovation policy as critical for maintaining our international competitiveness and creating jobs. But the best policies are not self-evident. As someone who was trained as an engineer and a social scientist, I believe we need data and proper analysis of this data to be able to determine as best we can the optimal policy. We are going to hear today about some of the research that is being done on science policy. I'm eager to hear the panel's thoughts on what is being found, how well these findings are being disseminated, and whether research in this area is actually helping policymakers. While many of us would agree that science has had a positive impact on our lives, I think we know very little about how the process of innovation works. What kinds of research programs or institutional structures are most effective? How do investments in R&D translate to more jobs, improved health, and overall societal well-being? How should we balance investments in basic and applied research? With millions of Americans out of work, it becomes more critical than ever that we find answers to these questions. We'll also take a closer look at the state of education in science and technology policy and how these degree programs and courses of study are contributing by educating the next generation of researchers and science policy practitioners. There are a variety of science and technology policy programs that are popping up across the country. They can be found in public policy schools, economics departments, business schools, and other places, even philosophy departments. I'm looking forward to hearing more about these programs, including what kind of students they attract and where those students go upon graduation. Finally, I hope to hear recommendations from today's witnesses about how the federal government, particularly the National Science Foundation, can foster interdisciplinary research in this area and how it can contribute to improved education and training for students who want to pursue a career at the intersection of science, technology, and public policy. I thank the witnesses for being here this afternoon, especially as we've had to move this hearing back from the morning, and I look forward to your testimony. Now, before I recognize Dr. Ehlers, this will likely be the last hearing of this subcommittee, last meeting of the subcommittee. It may not be, but just in case it is the last for this Congress, I wanted to say that I think we should all recognize Dr. Ehlers for his contributions in Congress, and especially on this committee through the years. It has been certainly I've had a great partner working on this as I've chaired the subcommittee for the last 2 years. He is someone who really, truly is dedicated to the issues that we are facing here and we deal with here in the committee. Too many things right now, I think, are becoming partisan footballs, And Dr. Ehlers really has kept his eye on what is best in trying to find what is best for our country. And I want to thank you for the years that you have put in here, and wish you the best in your next endeavors. But it's been a pleasure to work with you, especially over these last 2 years. And with that, I will now recognize Dr. Ehlers for an opening statement.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Mr. Chairman. I think my biggest challenge will be learning how to sleep in. But I very much appreciate those comments. I've always just tried to do a good job wherever I am. It's a trait I learned from my parents, and never, ever expected to be in the Congress or in politics. And my mother never quite got over it, that I had, as she put it, "What are you doing with all those nasty people?" But turns out my colleagues here are not nasty people. And I appreciate your leadership on this subcommittee, Dan, and you've done a great job of leading us in the right direction. And it's been a pleasure to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have an opening statement?
With that, I will proceed to the opening statement. Today, we will explore the current state of science and technology policy research and the role it plays in informing our policy decisions. And I have to insert a little comment in here, and that is when I first arrived here and was assigned to the Science Committee, which made obvious sense, since I was, at that time, I think, one of the very few, if the only, scientists in the Congress, at least on the Republican side. And first meeting of the Science Committee, I asked the chair, "How many scientists do you have on staff?" And the answer was none. And I said, "Really? How can you function without me?" He said, "Well, we don't really need people who understand science. We need people who understand science policy." Well, as a scientist, I had never thought much about science policy. And little did I know that in a conversation with Newt Gingrich, where I commented that I thought it a bit strange that the science policy we were operating under in the government and in the Congress was Vannevar Bush's 1945 book. And I said, that's a little out of date. Things change rapidly in science. It's a great book, The Endless Frontier. And Vannevar Bush was a great man. He'd done a lot of good work, especially during World War II. But I talked to Newt Gingrich about that was the latest science policy book that was guiding the government. So he did, as Newt Gingrich always did, said, "Hey, it is time we get another one. Why don't you do it?" So I learned after a couple of years never to suggest anything to Newt, because he always dumped the burden on me. But in any event, I did proceed to work on a book which just walked in the door with my aide. And some of you have seen it already. It's called Unlocking Our Future. Now, this is not a great science policy book. I knew absolutely nothing about science policy when we proceeded to write it, but it seemed to me there are certain things that were obvious, and we put them in here. And I deliberately said unlocking our future because I felt we had so much to do, and I wasn't able to do it in this thin little volume. It did get some notice, and it inspired some science policy individuals to engage more seriously in this, and many of them are represented here. But it was a real education to me. You should try that sometime, writing a book about something you know nothing about. It's a great way to learn. And fortunately, I had as a child, I was homeschooled because of illness, and so all the learning I did was things that I learned on my own. So that was good preparation for this. We clearly badly need something like this again, and it's one case where the author is delighted to say, this is too old now, it's time to get busy, someone else better start writing a better thing. Let me continue with my opening statement. When Dr. John Marburger, who was science advisor to President Bush, called for the establishment of a science of science policy, in 2005 we embarked on a new journey into this emerging field of interdisciplinary research by establishing an interagency working group. The Science of Science and Innovation Policy program at the National Science Foundation. The shorthand for it was SciSip, and most recently the Science and Technology for America's Reinvestment, which is the emphasis that I and others, including the authors of The Gathering Storm, have been emphasizing, because it's important for us to measure the effect of research on innovation, competitiveness, and science, which has come to be called STAR metrics. I hope this hearing will provide us with a detailed measurement of how far we have come on that journey, as well as an encouraging picture of the progress we have made. I have spent many years on this committee working to strengthen U.S. innovation and science education, and I have been a long-time advocate of increased federal funding for basic research. I wish the entire Congress were as receptive to that notion as the audience in front of us today is. But this funding produces the technological innovations that will keep America competitive in the global market, and it is essential for us to educate American workers in the skills needed for 21st century jobs. As with any program, sustained congressional oversight is required to ensure that the Science of Science policy programs are effective and that they progress in a timely and fiscally responsible manner. I am encouraged by efforts which seek to maximize our current investments in scientific research, and I believe it is very important that those R&D investments provide us with measurable returns, and that is why I've worked so hard to try and make the research and development tax credit permanent, because that's one good way to encourage industry to work on these issues. We must be mindful of that fact as Congress deliberates the best ways to use American taxpayer funds in this difficult economic climate. To that end, I'm very interested in learning more about the progress and potential of the STAR Metrics program and its recently completed pilot project. I look forward to learning more about the status of science affecting science policy and the advancements which have been made since 2005. And I want to thank our panel of witnesses for being here today, for accommodating our last-second scheduling change, and I look forward to hearing their insights on this topic. There's much work to be done to help our nation recover its lead in technological development and in manufacturing and in science in general. And so I'm looking forward to the testimony today, and I hope you can enlighten us, and out of this will come, first of all, a new version of this, and secondly, some improvement in our judgments about science and also science education in this nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ehlers. Maybe we can make that a bestseller now. Now, if there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, their statements will be added to the record at this point. And at this time, I want to introduce our witnesses. Dr. Julia Lane is the Program Director of the Science of Science and Innovation Policy Program at the National Science Foundation. Dr. Daniel Sarowitz is the Co-Director of the Consortium for Science, Policy, and Outcomes and Professor of Science and Society at Arizona State University. Dr. Fiona Murray is an Associate Professor of Management in the Technological Innovation and Entrepreneur Group at MIT Sloan School of Management. And Dr. Albert H. Teit is the Director of Science and Policy Programs at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. As our witnesses should know, you will each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing. When you all have completed your spoken testimony, we will begin with questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. And before we begin, I just want to mention that we will be having votes coming up soon. Probably one of the most important things, if everyone can
through which investments in science and engineering work their way through the outcomes that we've mentioned. It funds researchers from a wide range of disciplines, and it funds students to study science policy issues in a scientific manner. As you also know, it supports the redesign of surveys undertaken by the National Science Foundation Science Resource Statistics, the statistical agency charged with describing the science and innovation enterprise. For example, the new Business Research R&D and Innovation Survey, the BIRDIES survey, has been completely redesigned from a 1950s structure to something that captures the new R&D innovation activities. So it's not just the academic community that's advancing the science of science policy. It's also policymakers in the executive and legislative branches who recognize that we need these better approaches. That's why the National Science and Technology Committee established the Science of Science Policy Interagency Task Group. That task group, the science policy agencies that are represented on that, created a roadmap, and that characterized our current system of measuring the science and engineering enterprise as inadequate. We can do better. There is enormous potential to do better. The first step to doing better is to get better data. Just as good bricks need straw, good research in an empirical field like science and innovation policy requires good data. So to that end, the SciSIP program and the Science of Science Policy Interagency Group initiated the development of the STAR Metrics program, to which you've already alluded. The benefits of this program is that rather than having balkanized data sets that different agencies and different institutions use to answer the types of questions that the American people are asking, we can develop a common, bottom-up empirical infrastructure that will be available to all recipients of federal funding and to science agencies to quickly respond to state, congressional, and OMB requests. It's critical that we take a bottom-up effort in order to develop these approaches, one that's domain-specific, generalizable, and replicable. Phase 1 started in March, jointly sponsored by NIH, the lead agency, NSF, and OSTP, and that's collecting the data required to, with low burden, respond to questions about the jobs associated with science funding. Phase 2, which is trying to collect broader data on a wide range of outcomes, not just jobs, but social, scientific, economic, and workforce outcomes, is beginning this fall with formal consultations with research institutions. Furthermore, science is fundamentally an international endeavor. We've engaged with the European Union, with the Japanese, with the Brazilians, with many countries in order to document the impact of science investments. In fact, the Japanese government has recently set aside funding for a Japanese equivalent of a SciSip program. The European Union has also shown considerable interest in what we've been up to and is considering emulating the bottom-up, low-burden endeavor that the SciSip, the Science of Science Policy, and the STAR Metrics program has pushed forward to. And the Brazilian government has also requested briefings on the SciSip, Science of Science Policy, and STAR Metrics program. This concludes my testimony, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to answering any questions you or the members of the committee might have.
Thank you, Dr. Lane. Dr. Sarowitz.
Thank you, Chairman Lipinski and Ranking Member Ehlers. I very much appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to testify. So my name is Daniel Sarowitz. I'm a professor of science and society at Arizona State University, where I co-direct the Consortium for Science, Policy, and Outcomes, which works to understand and improve the linkages between science and technology and social outcomes. We're located on ASU's Tempe campus. We also have a location here in DC. We're a highly interdisciplinary and collaborative organization involving researchers at dozens of other institutions. We're also fortunate to receive generous grant funding from NSF, including from the Science and Innovation Policy program, so I declare my vested interest in the outcomes of this hearing. I'd like to make 3 brief points in support of my overextensive written testimony. The first is about the importance of the SciSip program itself. With shrinking discretionary budgets, vibrant economic competitors, and daunting challenges to our well-being, the nation needs effective tools for making better decisions about how to design, assess, and set priorities for our science and innovation enterprise. For the most part, we lack these tools, as we've already heard. As former presidential science advisor Jack Marburger said in 2005, the nascent field of social science of science policy needs to grow up, and quickly. With modest resources, SciSip is mobilizing a community of researchers to focus on the complex problem of how to wring the most out of our public investment in R&D. SciSip reacted quickly to support research assessing the impacts of stimulus funding for R&D, and is beginning with NIH to take on the incredibly complex problem of evaluating what the nation gets for its enormous investment in biomedical R&D. These are really difficult challenges, and it's hard to see how this committee and others at the helm of the R&D enterprise can guide it effectively in the absence of such efforts. My second point is that outputs are not outcomes, and SciSip needs to focus on outcomes. Outputs are immediate products of R&D, like publications and patents and PhDs. Outcomes are what people care about. Not just economic growth, but of course economic growth, but also secure and affordable food supplies and energy supplies, high quality public health, a clean environment, expanding job opportunities, and strong national defense. The 40-year war on cancer has yielded the output of remarkable new scientific knowledge, yet very modest gains in public health outcomes, despite the tens of billions spent. 30 years of energy R&D output has done little to advance the outcome of reducing our vulnerability to energy-based threats to security, economy, and environment. Research on science and innovation policy to date has given us a pretty good idea how to design and assess science policies to enhance outputs. but we still have a lot to learn about how to implement and assess successful outcome-based science and innovation policies. My final point is that research on outcomes-based science and innovation policies and the use of such research by decision makers are not separate problems. While the SciSIP program is commendably serious about disseminating its results to policymakers, the dissemination problem is also structural. That is, it's built into the way we organize much research, including SciSIP. NSF's great strength in supporting bottom-up inquiry on fundamental problems is also a weakness when there's an urgent need for new knowledge, the need that Dr. Marburger pointed out. Such cases require close ties between those who do research and decision makers who might use research results. And we already heard from Julia Lane some of her efforts to create those ties. Now, on the one hand, these ties allow researchers to understand the needs of decision makers and to recognize the types of information that will be both usable and used. But at the same time, close ties allow decision makers to understand what research can and cannot do for them. Such mutual understanding breeds trust and value and usable science. There are many examples of federal programs that link research performance and research use, including USDA's Agricultural Extension Service, the USGS Earthquake Hazards Program, NOAA's Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessments Program. Similarly, DARPA is justifiably well regarded for its capacity to connect the technology needs of DoD to research groups in academia and the private sector. These and other examples are discussed in the handbook Usable Science, which I just happen to have brought along with me, which summarizes the results of CSPO's 5-year NSF-funded Decision-Making Under Uncertainty project carried out jointly with researchers at the University of Colorado. These lessons can be applied to SciSIP. Let me mention 3 possibilities. First, NSF could sponsor one or more large centers for SciSIP research, education, and outreach with a core requirement to build strong, ongoing collaborations between researchers and science policy decision makers. Second, NSF could work with mission-oriented R&D agencies to integrate SciSIP activities into a range of existing outcome-oriented programs. Third, NSF could require all of its center-scale awardees, such as science and technology centers and engineering research centers, to be designed from the outset to include integrated SciSIP components. Through these sorts of approaches, SciSIP could enhance its capacity to produce usable knowledge for the near to medium term and help accelerate a convergence between science and innovation policy research and policy decisions across a range of R&D outcome priorities. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to discussing these issues more.
Thank you, Dr. Sarowitz. I think that's the beginning of votes, but we should be able to get the testimony in here. Dr. Murray.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman Lipinski, and other members of the subcommittee for the opportunity for being here. My name is Fiona Murray. As you heard before, I'm a professor of innovation and entrepreneurship at the MIT Sloan School, and I'm also Associate Director of the MIT Entrepreneurship Center. To start my remarks, I thought I'd just describe the perspective I bring. Briefly, I am the grateful recipient of 2 SciSIP grants. I've worked on what I would think of as a SciSIP-oriented research agenda for more than a decade, although really only discovered the SciSIP research community in about 2006. As a faculty member at a business school, I also engage on these issues with managers, scientists themselves, who are also interested in a sense at the lower levels of how to organize effectively to ensure the productivity and impact of their research. I should also just say something about my own training. I have a background of bachelor's, master's, and PhD in chemistry. That's a very unusual training for somebody who does SciSIP. I think it enables me to bring a unique understanding of the bench science to this research, although as I do note in my written remarks, I'm not sure that this is an ideal path to learn the rigorous social science methods that one really needs. I've had to rely on, again, self-education and some very patient co-authors to get me over what I think is a quite high bar to make a serious contribution to this endeavor, and in particular to do it in a way that contributes to the policy and the scholarly debate. I want to just take my time to see if I can make 3 points. I'll make 2 if only time permits. Something about the vision of SciSIP and what I think that means about the kinds of gaps there are in the research, and then also how I think the SciSIP community might more effectively be organized to really have an impact in terms of research links to the community and in particular education. So I think that SciSIP is not simply about doing science and technology analysis. I think there's already an excellent scholarship describing policy initiatives, the government attitude towards science, and the politics of science and innovation policy. What I think that SciSIP brings, which is unique, is this sort of scientific lens to the problem. And what I mean by that is that it's a serious and I think important attempt to undertake causal analysis and evidence-based analysis. asking whether and how particular policy interventions actually have an impact, both in the short run and the long run. And so I think that good SciSIP research defines impact richly. It's about the level and the rate and the direction of scientific progress and innovation, but it's also about long-run impact on economic growth. But I also want to emphasize this causal piece of what kinds of policies we think make a difference. I think that at its best, SciSIP defines policy broadly but precisely in particular research instances. And so it can mean everything from high-level national policies, laws, but also agency implementation processes, agency selection processes. But below that, community behaviors, things like the Bermuda Rules and so on, and even at a more micro level, lab level choices around how we choose and to organize scientific research at the ground level. I think a key approach to SciSIP has been grounded in two recent developments. One is the data developments that have already been discussed, but I would also say have been enabled actually by a massive scientific data infrastructure investment. So in some of my own work has really been enabled by investments in things like GenBank and one's ability to interrogate genetic data to then do science policy analyses. But also I think a second piece is social science methods in program evaluation. I'm sure you're familiar with this from the work that you do on evaluating education policy, but I think that the ability to use experiments and causal analysis and so on from that policy evaluation toolkit is extremely important to pushing SciSIP forward. So I think that SciSIP has really been critical and attracted serious scholars, but in my view there are still some gaps. To pick on the straw and bricks analogy, it strikes me that while we need bricks, if we want to cross the bridge from data to understanding, we actually have to build a bridge with those bricks. And what does that mean? I think that does mean more analysis as well as just measurement. I think at the moment, a lot of the SciSIP work, including my own, is tremendously focused on biologists and our funding on the National Institutes of Health. That's critical, but not the only arena. And I think that we do need to understand how other disciplines and other agencies are working. I think that there's been a focus on national level rules and specific agencies and less on these community level choices about how to organize structure collaborations and more informal efforts. I think we also need to focus on distributional issues. So not just how many more papers are produced, but what kind. Are they breakthrough? Are they everyday science? What kinds of researchers? Are they American or foreign? And so on. I don't think we've focused enough on that. And let me turn in the last few seconds to saying something about the SciSIP community. I think that the community actually needs to do more of its own bottoms-up organizing. The NSF has done a tremendous job in kind of structuring it in a top-down way, but that's a huge amount of work for one agency to do, and I think as a community we need to do more bottom-up in order to both engage in more knowledge exchange among ourselves, to focus on education, and I think the educational imperative at the PhD level does need to be organized across a number of campuses, and then I think at the policy level and our links to policymakers, again, have to be organized in a more community-based way. So I would suggest that that needs to be done through a consortium of universities, but with this tripartite mission of research, education, and then links to policy. And I'll leave my remarks there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Murray. Dr. Teich.
Thank you, Chairman Lipinski, Ranking Member Ehlers, other members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify at this hearing today. I'm Al Teich, and I am Director of Science and Policy Programs at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Although, as you know, AAAS and I myself have been deeply involved in science and innovation policy for many years. Although this has been an active field of research at least since the 1960s and has produced a large body of literature and a substantial number of researchers, there's a feeling that the results of this work are not widely known or used among those who actually make science and innovation policy. This was behind the frustration of Dr. Marburger in his speech, which led to the establishment of the NSF SciSIP program. The SciSIP program has a unique mandate to couple advances in fundamental knowledge about processes of scientific discovery and technological innovation with issues of relevance to policymakers. Among the features that differentiate the SciSIP program from its predecessors are the fact that it is not just supporting individual research grants, but it is attempting to build a community of practice among researchers and to connect that community with potential users of the research, practitioners in the federal government. AAAS has played an active role in building this community of practice through a workshop in 2009 that brought researchers together to learn from one another. In that workshop, we saw how SciSip researchers reflect distinct disciplinary traditions that can inhibit a productive interdisciplinary dialogue. Even in this not very large field, they can't always talk to one another. They may ask different questions, use different theoretical frameworks, and employ different methodologies, even when they may address seemingly similar topics. At the same time, because of the academic reward system, SciSip researchers, like many other researchers, seldom speak in terms that policymakers find directly useful. As one speaker said at the 2009 AAAS workshop, policymakers are confronted with a babel of tongues, which leads them to ignore the experts and turn to other sources of information and advice. Next month, AAAS will convene another workshop with NSF support. That one will try to connect researchers with customers in the government. We hope that that workshop will serve to allow the two communities to better understand each other's needs and expectations. While projects like the AAAS NSF SciSip workshops are an important step in building a community of practice, there's more that can be done. Here are a couple of ideas just as food for thought. Regarding research, researchers tend to communicate directly with their peers via journals and conference presentations in order to gain recognition in their fields. But few policymakers read those journals or attend those conferences. We need to find ways to encourage SciSip researchers to communicate with policymakers either directly or through the media, and to be rewarded and not penalized by less policy-oriented peers in their fields for doing so. On the teaching side, although many of the university programs that provide graduate training in science and innovation policy are interdisciplinary, the training they provide is not always responsive to the needs and priorities of policymakers. It might be useful to strengthen ties between researchers and policymakers by engaging policymakers in helping to develop and review curricula, as well as engaging them in teaching as adjuncts or guest lecturers. Some schools already do this. Others would do well to follow their lead. And beyond education, there's another mechanism for promoting greater mutual understanding between researchers and policymakers. It's people transfer. One approach might be to create a program to give SciSip researchers the opportunity to work in government for perhaps a year. Providing SciSip researchers an opportunity to work in a policymaking setting for a while, as we do for scientists and engineers in our Congressional Fellows Program, would allow them to gain firsthand knowledge regarding the needs, priorities, and modes of operation of the potential users of their work. Like our workshops, this hearing is an opportunity for the science policy community to hear from you as policymakers what research questions you believe SciSip researchers should be addressing. I look forward to the Q&A as an opportunity to exchange ideas on that subject.
Thank you, Dr. Teich. I'm gonna start questions if you want to leave to get over to votes. I think we have about 4 minutes left, probably in the first vote, but I think this vote's going to last a long time. But then we will, if the witnesses can come back afterwards, it's probably going to be about an hour, though. I'm not sure if any of you will have to leave at that point, but Dr. Ehlers, yes? You have a suggestion?
No, just a quick comment, which shows the importance of this topic and why we should come back if we can, depending on the votes. But I would simply observe that the current process in the Congress is that science policy is set by the appropriations subcommittees. The money controls everything, and when they decide to give a certain amount of money to a certain project, that's basically ends up being the decision. That totally ignores the input of other scientists and SciSip folks who have a much greater interest So something you can think about in the meantime is how that could be addressed without throwing out the Appropriations Committee entirely, which is probably impossible. So I just wanted to mention that, and I hope you'll have some brilliant ideas on how we could practically address that particular problem. My staff just informed me 300 people have not yet voted, so we can probably walk over instead of running over. But I hope the votes don't go on too long. And I'd be delighted if any of you would take on the challenge to follow this. Let me, one quick last comment. When Newt Gingrich was here, he wanted to double the funding of NIH, which did happen in the Appropriations Committee. I argued that we should have equal funding increase for NSF. Treat all the sciences equally. He said, we'll do that one next. Well, unfortunately, we lost the majority, and so the next time never happened. But today, I've heard Newton say in numerous speeches, the one big mistake he regrets is not having increased NSF and the other hard sciences at the same time we increased NIH. So let that be a moral note for all of you who hope someday to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm hoping that you can make sure you spread that word amongst your colleagues before you leave, so
Yeah.
can help us who really want to make sure we get that done in the future. Well, you now have your homework assignment. We will have probably about an hour, and we will be back hopefully sooner than that, but it's going to be at least 45 minutes, I'd say, and look forward to hearing your answers. I'm most interested in how we really make these connections. Dr. Tyke, I appreciate some of your comments. I'd just like to delve maybe some more into how we can, having been as a political scientist, and talk about not, policymakers don't read the journals. Political scientists weren't reading the journals because it didn't really speak to them, much less the policymakers. But I'd like to delve into that also some more, how we can improve that. But that the subcommittee will be in recess.
So you know, Marcy talked to the boss, and he said that he could float it or that it was somewhat flexible, but so if you knew anything more, that's better guidance for us. Sounds good.